Hi everyone, I'm Josiewose. It's time for story time, and today we're going to be reading Luca from the Disney Movie Collection, a special Disney Storybook series. If you like this book, make sure you go out and buy it so you can read along with me, and you can also check out the movie as well on Disney+. Here we go. Everyone in Portorosso had heard about sea monsters, horrifying beasts that lurked deep in the ocean. Many believed the stories were real, while others thought they were simply tall tales. One night, two fishermen left the harbour, ready for a relaxing evening of fishing. Moments after they cast their net, the dark water rippled as something moved beneath the surface. The men turned to see a strange, shadowy figure reaching into their boat. The creature darted away, getting tangled in their fishing net. As the men struggled to pull it in, a sea monster leapt out of the water and soared above them. Terrified, the fishermen stumbled back, knocking items overboard as the sea monster dived back into the water and swam away. The next morning, a young sea monster named Luca led his flock of goatfish to pasture. The scattered items from the fishing boat caught his attention. "Whoa!" said Luca as he picked up a playing card. His gaze travelled up to the surface, where brilliant rays of sunshine were penetrating the water. Suddenly, a boat zoomed overhead. "Land monsters!" shouted Luca. "Everybody under the rock!" As he waited for it to pass, he imagined that he was travelling up towards the boat. Every sea monster knew of the dangers of the surface, but Luca had always yearned to explore the world above. "Luca!" his mother called. His mother's voice shook him from his thoughts. "Lunch is ready!" Luca averted his gaze from the water's surface and led his flock home. After lunch, Luca returned to the pasture with his flock. He spotted more items that had fallen from the fishing boat. Luca followed a trail of them, unaware that a figure in a diving suit was approaching. Luca turned around and screamed. "It's fine, I'm not human," said the diver, removing his helmet. His name was Alberto Scorfano. Alberto dashed around collecting the treasures and then took them ashore. Luca couldn't believe it when Alberto pulled him up too. Once Luca was on dry land, he began transforming into a human boy. He flopped around trying to get back into the water. Alberto told him to relax. Luca took a deep breath and looked around. He was finally seeing the world he had dreamed about for so long. "Isn't it great?" said Alberto. No, it's bad, and I'm not supposed to be up here. Good day," exclaimed Luca, and splashed back into the sea. The next morning, Luca snuck back to shore and struggled as he tried to walk for the first time. Alberto was happy to offer lessons. "Don't worry," he said. "I basically invented it." After Luca was able to stumble around on his new legs, Alberto said, "Come on, I'll show you some more stuff." The next morning, Luca snuck back to shore and found Alberto. Alberto led Luca to his secret hideout. He said his dad wasn't around much, so he was able to do whatever he wanted. Luca loved Alberto's collection of human stuff and was especially drawn to a poster with a Vespa on it. "You just sit on it and it takes you anywhere you want to go," Alberto exclaimed. "Are you going to take one? Are you going to make one?" asked Luca. Alberto loved that idea. "You want to help?" Luca knew he should get home, but couldn't tear himself away. As they started building their Vespa, And even though he kept saying he had to leave, he stayed until they were done. "See you tomorrow," said Alberto as Luca raced home. When Luca arrived late for dinner, his mother, Daniela, asked where he had been. He stumbled over his words. "It's my fault," said Grandma Paguro. "I sent him to look for sea cucumbers." "Right," said Luca, catching on. "Sorry, Grandma, I couldn't find them." Relieved, he quietly thanked her. Over the next few days, Alberto and Luca spent as much time as possible together. The two bonded over building and rebuilding their Vespa. They spied on fishermen, yelled into caves, and leapt off cliffs and did belly flops into the sea. As the boys took in the sunset, Luca used sea snail slime to slide his hair just like Alberto's. One day, Alberto told Luca to hop on the Vespa with him, but Luca was scared. "You got a Bruno in your head," explained Alberto. He told Luca to say "Silenzio Bruno" to quiet his inner voice of doubt. Soon, the two were shouting "Silenzio Bruno" as they sped down the hill, hit the ramp, and soared into the sky. As they began to plummet, Luca saw they were headed straight for a boulder. Thinking fast, he pushed Alberto away from him, causing the scooter to split in half and avoid the boulder. The friends cheered as they safely splashed into the water. As night fell, Luca and Alberto gazed up at the sky, feeling happy. Alberto told Luca the stars were anchovies and the moon was a big fish that protected them. "I touched her once," he added, pointing to the moon. Luca loved hearing about Alberto's adventures. They started talking about how amazing it would be to have a real Vespa, and soon Luca drifted off. He dreamed he was riding across the night, reaching up and touching twinkling fish. It was a lovely dream, but he was shaken from it. "Oh no," he said with a gasp, "I fell asleep." Alberto barely opened his eyes to see Luca hurry off. When Luca arrived home, his parents were waiting. They had found out about his trips to the shore. "You're going to stay with Uncle Hugo for the rest of the season," said Daniela. Uncle Hugo lived in the deepest part of the sea. "The world is a very dangerous place, Luca," Daniela continued, "and if I have to send you to the bottom of the ocean to keep you safe, so be it." Luca snuck off to Alberto and asked, "What do I do?" They both knew Luca's parents would find him if he stayed in Alberto's hideout. "But will they come looking for you over there?" said Alberto, pointing towards Portorosso. Luca thought it was far too dangerous, but when Alberto said the town was probably full of Vespas, he considered it. "There's got to be one for us," said Alberto. The idea of exploring the world on a real Vespa whisked the boys into action. "Take me, gravity!" shouted Alberto, doing a backflip off the cliff. Luca whispered, "Silenzio Bruno," and followed Alberto into the sea. The friends cheered and laughed as they swam towards Portorosso, ready to find their Vespa. When they reached the outskirts of town, Alberto reminded Luca, "Just don't get wet." They continued to the piazza, the bustling centre of Portorosso. The sights and smells were overwhelming. People were playing games, talking, laughing, shopping and eating. Luca wanted to take in every bit of it. As Luca and Alberto tried to blend in, they accidentally insulted two elderly women. Then they saw a fountain with a sculpture of a man slaying a sea monster. Luca started to panic and wanted to leave, but then he and Alberto heard the sound of a motor. A boy named Ercole appeared on a Vespa. Luca and Alberto couldn't peel their eyes away from the Vespa. "Stop looking," said Ercole. "She's too beautiful for you." Then He mocked Luca and told him he smelled like the back of a fish store. Ercole's friends, Cuccio and Guido, held Alberto back as Ercole dragged Luca to the fountain. "Ah, just a little bath," said Ercole, pushing Luca down towards the water. As Luca's face began to scale up, someone shouted, "Hey!" A girl named Giulia barreled through on her bike, forcing Ercole to jump. Ercole eyed Giulia's fish delivery bike. "Wow, that's how you're training for the race." He made fun of her for losing the Portorosso Cup to him every year. When he turned his attention back to the boys, Giulia said they were coming with her. "Hop on," she said. "I could use the extra weight." Luca and Alberto joined Giulia on her fish deliveries. She told them the Portorosso Cup was a traditional Italian triathlon that included swimming, cycling, and eating pasta. When Alberto and Luca found out they could use the prize money to buy a used Vespa, they wanted to enter. They asked Giulia if she would team up with them. Giulia narrowed her gaze at the two boys. "Let's see what you got." Luca climbed on Giulia's bike and promptly fell off. "Eyes up," said Giulia. "Looking down is what's making you fall." Luca took her advice. "Whoa, I'm doing it," he exclaimed, pedaling a few meters. "Can you dodge obstacles?" she asked, pretending to be an old lady in his path. Luca yelped as he swerved to avoid her. "Can you withstand passive-aggressive verbal assaults?" He cringed as Giulia yelled at him, pretending to be Ercole. And finally, "Can you handle the course's fiendishly difficult terrain?" Luca crashed as he tried riding across a plank, but quickly got back on, ready to go again. Giulia could tell they wanted to win as much as she did, so she agreed to form a team. Alberto would do the eating portion of the race, Luca do the cycling, and she would do the swimming. Later on, they had dinner at Giulia's house and met her dad, Massimo. When they found out he hunted sea monsters, Luca accidentally spat out his water and sprayed Alberto. Luca tackled Alberto and quickly dried him off, but Giulia's cat, Machiavelli, had seen everything. He growled and glared at the boys. When Giulia asked Massimo for the race entry fee, he said business was slow. He hadn't been catching enough fish. Luca and Alberto offered to help, and Massimo accepted. Giulia invited Luca and Alberto to stay in her backyard hideout. She cleared away some of her stuff and said, "Buonanotte, boys." Once they had left, Luca whispered, "That was close." "I know. Like, how big was that dad human?" said Alberto. The two chatted about the day's adventures until they drifted off to sleep. Luca's parents, Daniela and Lorenzo, had just arrived in Portorosso to search for their son. Daniela reminded Lorenzo to be careful. There's gonna be land monsters everywhere. Suddenly, she saw a human and tackled him to the ground. "Not today, land monster," she yelled. "It's me," shouted Lorenzo. Daniela hadn't recognized him as a human. They took a breath and pressed on, determined to find Luca. The next morning, Luca and Alberto led Massimo to a great fishing spot. Giulia finished her deliveries in record time and met them at the marina. "Santa Pecorino," she said in awe, looking at the boat overflowing with fish. The kids headed to the piazza to sign up for the Portorosso Cup. Meanwhile, Daniela tried to figure out how they were going to spot Luca in his human form. Lorenzo wanted to take action. He boldly pushed a nearby boy into the harbour. The boy did not transform into Luca, but he did start to cry. "Run, before its mother gets here," yelled Daniela. The two hurried off to continue their search. As the friends stood in line to sign up for the race, Ercole mocked them. Giulia tried to fire back but couldn't think of any good names to call him. "A catfish," Luca suggested. "They're bottom feeders and they also have two sad little whiskers," he explained. Everyone laughed, including Guido and Cuccio. Furious, Ercole towered over Luca, vowing to destroy him in the race. Giulia immediately began training the boys. They had a lot of work to do. Alberto struggled to use a fork as he ate different types of pasta, and Luca had to learn to ride downhill without falling off his bike. When it was time for Giulia to practice her swimming, Luca and Alberto followed her in a rowboat. Ercole and his friends were out looking for sea monsters. When they saw Luca and Alberto, they zoomed by, sending up a big wave. Alberto transformed and Luca panicked. As he flung his arms, he pushed Alberto overboard. Luca managed to get Alberto back into the boat and dried off before anyone saw him. Daniela and Lorenzo searched the piazza. A soccer ball had rolled towards them, and Daniela kicked it, accidentally knocking a kid into the fountain. "I have an idea," she said. Daniela joined the game and used her impressive soccer skills to knock each kid into the fountain. But none of them were Luca. That evening, when Luca mentioned seeing fish in the night sky, Giulia led Luca to a telescope. She told him all about the stars and pointed out her favorite planet, Saturn. Luca's mind burst with curiosity. He imagined running laps around the rings of Saturn. Luca couldn't get enough of Giulia's school books either. There was so much to learn. Later that evening, Alberto took Luca to a mechanic's garage and showed him an old Vespa for sale. "Soon you'll be ours, sweet Vespa," said Alberto. He pulled out a drawing, showing Luca his design plan. "That's so cool," said Luca. The two were super excited. But when Luca mentioned visiting Giulia at school, Alberto frowned. "Luca, sea monsters can't go to school." A harpoon whizzed through the air, startling them. Ercole and his friends approached. "Something's fishy with you two," he said. When Alberto insulted Ercole, Cuccio and Guido held him against the wall. Trembling, Luca grabbed the harpoon. "Let him go," he said, aiming it at Ercole. They released Alberto, and he and Luca ran off. Over the next few days, the group worked hard, training for the Portorosso Cup. Alberto's fork skills were improving, and Luca was getting stronger and faster on his bike. The three friends were working hard and having fun, but Alberto noticed how Luca and Giulia were growing closer. He was beginning to feel jealous. When Giulia pointed out the train that went to her school, Luca asked her if the school was open to anyone. Alberto rolled his eyes and reminded them to focus on training. Giulia tried to help Luca conquer his fear of riding downhill. "Would you stop bossing him around?" said Alberto. "I'm his friend. I know what he needs." Alberto jumped on the bike with Luca and pushed off. The boys careened wildly down the hill. Luca begged him to stop, but Alberto refused to brake. They argued as they whipped through town, completely out of control. Finally, they hit the edge of the road, sailed off a cliff, and plunged into the water. See? Luca and Alberto scrambled onto the shore. They began to argue and fight over Luca wanting to go to school. Luca pushed Alberto off of him moments before Giulia ran up. She was relieved to see them alive. "We were wondering if we could come with you to your school," said Luca. Giulia loved that idea, but then Alberto asked if the school would accept sea monsters. "Sea monsters?" Giulia said, confused. Alberto fell back into the water and transformed right before her eyes. Giulia screamed, desperate to keep his own secret. Luca pointed at Alberto and yelled, "Sea monster!" Hearing those words, Ercole readied his harpoon. Luca watched sadly as Alberto swam away. At dinner that night, Massimo asked Giulia and Luca if they knew where Alberto was. "No," said Luca, but I don't think he wants anyone looking for him." "Maybe not, but just in case," said Massimo, leaving the house to search for Alberto. As Luca was trying to convince Giulia that the two of them could still race, Giulia splashed water on his hands, causing them to scale up. "What were you guys thinking?" she said. She couldn't believe they had come to a place full of people who hunt sea monsters. It hurt her to say goodbye, but she knew Luca had to leave for his own safety. Luca left Giulia's house and swam back to Alberto's hideout. He needed to apologize to his friend. When he entered the hideout, Luca noticed tally marks on the wall. He asked Alberto what they meant. "I started when my dad left," Alberto said. Luca was shocked. "You were living here, all alone, for that many days?" "I just stopped counting after a while," replied Alberto. "I'll go win the race," Luca said, "and then the Vespa will be ours, and we'll ride away together." "Luca, that's crazy," said Alberto. "Well, maybe I'm crazy," he said. Then he ran and jumped off the roof, shouting, "Take me, gravity!" "Luca!" Alberto cried out. Luca landed safely and looked up. "I'm gonna fix this," he yelled as he ran off. The next morning, Giulia prepared for the race at the starting line as Ercole covered Cuccio with olive oil. "He will cut through the water like a knife," said Ercole. Giulia was surprised to see Luca in Alberto's diving suit. "This is a very bad idea," she whispered. Luca's parents were at the race, still searching for him. They volunteered to hand out water so they could splash anyone they thought might be their son. The race began. Luca took a deep breath, attached his helmet, and dived in. He struggled to run on the seafloor in the heavy suit, but pressed on. Cuccio was in the lead until fish attacked him, nibbling at the olive oil. Giulia focused her energy and pulled ahead. She hit the shore first and ran to the pasta stage. Giulia got right to work, twirling huge forkfuls of noodles. Luca and Guido arrived and tried their best to catch up. "Finito," said Giulia, slamming down her fork. Holding her stomach, she hobbled over to her bike and slowly pedaled off. Ercole couldn't believe his team was losing. "Faster," he yelled, stuffing pasta into Guido's mouth until the bowl was empty. Struggling through his plate of pasta, Luca was the last to finish. He sprinted to his bike, let out a giant burp, and zoomed off. Daniela and Lorenzo were trying to splash the racers when they spotted Luca. "Luca, stop!" shouted Daniela. "Sorry, Mum. Sorry, Dad. I have to do this," exclaimed Luca as he evaded his parents. He sped towards the front of the pack and soon passed Ercole. "What? Impossible!" Ercole blurted. Luca grinned and continued forward, but then he crested the hill and it began to rain. He rushed under an awning to stay dry. Suddenly, he saw Alberto coming to his rescue with a giant umbrella. But Ercole caught up and kicked Alberto, sending the umbrella flying. Soaking wet, Alberto turned into a sea monster in front of everyone. "Cuccio, my harpoons!" shouted Ercole. Alberto ran into the screeching crowd. "Stop that thing!" they shouted as they trapped him under a net. Luca rode out into the rain and pulled Alberto onto the back of his bike. The two sea monsters sped down the hill. Alberto ripped the net away and said, "You really are crazy." "Yeah, and I learned it from you," said Luca. Luca pedaled with all his might, speeding away as fast as he could. Ercole pulled ahead of Alberto and Luca, stood up on his bike and took aim with his harpoon. A moment before he let it fly, Giulia rammed into him. The force knocked both of them off their bikes and sent the harpoon off its mark. When Luca and Alberto saw Giulia on the ground, they jumped off their bike and ran to her side. The crowd watched as the sea monsters helped Giulia to her feet. Ercole aimed his harpoon again, but Luca refused to run. "We're not afraid of you," he shouted. "Stop! They're not monsters," said Giulia. "Yeah? Who are they then?" said Ercole. I know who they are, said Massimo. He lifted Alberto's in the hand and proclaimed, They're Luca and Alberto, and they are the winners. Confused, the three friends whirled around and gasped. Without realizing it, Luca and Alberto had crossed the finish line. They had won the Portorosso Cup. Who cares if they won, Ercole shouted. They're sea monsters. The crowd booed, and Ercole yelled at Guido and Ciccio. The two were fed up with Ercole and tossed him into the fountain. Daniela and Lorenzo pushed through the crowd and embraced their son. Even though they were angry with him for running away, they were also very proud. With the group showing their true selves, several townspeople dropped their umbrellas to reveal they were sea monsters too. Massimo invited everyone back to his house for dinner, and even Grandma Paguro showed up. The boys had finally bought their Vespa. Alberto, Luca and Giulia sat on it, laughing and cheering. We can't let him stay in this world, can we? Daniela asked Grandma Paguro. Some people, they'll never accept him, but some will. He seems to know how to find the good ones, Grandma Paguro replied. Santo Gonzola, I need to pack, said Giulia. For school? Oh, yeah, for school, said Luca wistfully. I can leave you some books, said Giulia. You can? Exclaimed Luca. Come on, Alberto. Alberto smiled as he watched them hurry towards the house. Then he looked down at the Vespa thoughtfully. The next morning, everyone headed to the train station. After the boys said their goodbyes to Giulia, Alberto had a surprise for Luca. He had sold the Vespa to buy Luca a train ticket. Luca's parents had agreed to let him go to school. Luca was ecstatic. However, Alberto wasn't going with him. He was staying in Portorosso with Massimo. I think he needs me, he explained. The boys hugged goodbye, knowing that even though they would miss each other, their friendship would always remain. Luca boarded the train, and as it chugged away, Alberto cheered him on. He lost sight of Alberto when the train entered a tunnel. When it emerged, Luca leaned into the sun, transforming into his sea monster self. He was ready for his next adventure. The end. Thanks for reading along with me, everyone. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos just like it. I'm Josiewose. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.